Welcome to the second episode of Verbal Weekly. In this episode, we are going to talk about a particularly troublesome area of grammar, prepositions. In fact, most of us continue to learn more things about prepositions in the course of our lifetimes. While I was trying to prepare the content for this video, I learned some rules that I had never known. The point that I'm trying to make is that for most of us, prepositions are learned by listening or reading. Nevertheless, there is a logic to it. So we're going to talk about 3 prepositions that are usually annoying for a lot of people because we get confused about how to use them. And a lot of times, because other people misuse them, we also do. These are at, on, and in. Since they are very troublesome, we've called this episode Pesky Prepositions. Let's get started. We're going to follow a similar format as the first episode. Let's start with some errors, if any, which means that there could be sentences that are correct. Let's take a look at the first one. He works at the supermarket. What do you think? Well, it sounds right to me. When you say that you work at a particular place, you are specifying the location. So this is absolutely correct. The second sentence here, it has 2 prepositions. I live on Hill Road at Bandra. Do you say I live on Hill Road? Do you say I live at Hill Road? Do you say I live in Hill Road? That's a point you might want to ponder. Give it a thought, and soon we will take a look at the correct version. I live on Hill Road in Bandra. Why in Bandra? Because Bandra is a fairly large area and you could be living anywhere within that. We are going to talk about the rules related to each of these errors. Just stay put. We have some more for you. What do you think about this one? Please do not throw food to the crows. Do we say to the crows or to any animals? We normally say at. And yet, this sentence is absolutely correct, and we will talk about why this is correct. Everyone was pointing to me and laughing. Normally, we say that people were pointing at me and laughing. So this one is fairly easy to see. But we have one more. He pointed at the message board. Can you point at something? Of course you can. But in this case, even though it seems to be a similar sentence, the preposition should be he pointed to the message board. As you can see, these prepositions can get you into trouble a lot of times. So let's start talking about how to decide which one is the right one. One of the things that we are going to look at is some general rules about the usage of these prepositions. But once the general rules are done, we will have to get into specifics. But let's start with a generalization. Whenever we use at, in, or on to refer to a place, you need to think of it in terms of specific, wider, and very wide. That's why we have a triangle here. Whenever we use at, we usually point to a very specific location. When we use on, then our point of reference gets a little broader. So we say that we live on a particular road or street. And then when we say in, the area becomes even wider. So we would say that we live in an area or in a city or in a neighborhood. It could also be a non-specific type of a residence. For example, I live in a cottage, because we don't really specify which cottage it is. It can be anywhere. But as I said, this is a generalization. Let's take a look at some specific examples. Now, when we want to say that you live in a particular place, or that I am in a particular place, or I work in a particular place, we can say that I live at. For example, I live at 10 Hill Road in Bandra. I wish I did, I don't. But nevertheless, you get the point. It's a very specific location. He was seated at the table. Why are we saying at the table? Can you sit on the table? Well, you can, but that's not the usual way to do things. So when we say that someone is seated at the table, it means that you're specifying their location somewhere around the table. We might also say that someone is standing at the window, which means that we want to specify that they are close to the window. Again, to be very, very specific about their location. Let's take a look at the last sentence here. This might be a little confusing. We stopped at Delhi on the way to Mumbai. But Delhi is a big city, right? So why are we saying at? The reason that we say at Delhi in this particular sentence is that we are looking at Delhi as a point along a line. So I'm not trying to refer to geometry here. Whenever you talk about a journey, the journey is supposed to be an ongoing continuous route. But if you make a stop somewhere on that journey, then that stop becomes a very specific point. So we can say that we stopped at Delhi, which is a specific point on the journey, on the way to someplace else. So I know that the rules can get a little confusing at times, but once you start visualizing it as a point on a journey, it becomes a lot easier. For example, if you are familiar with Mumbai or any other place which has metros or local trains, then you would know that the train travels from point A to point B, but on the way there are a lot of stops. So you would say that I will get down at a particular stop. It's the same concept. Let's take a look at the second preposition here, on. So we would say that one lives on or one is on a particular road or a particular floor. Why do we say that? Again, because when we name the road, then it becomes a little broader. It's not a very specific reference. So I live on Hill Road, or I stay on the 10th floor because I can stay anywhere on that floor. So again, somewhat non-specific reference. And the last one here talks about in. When we say in, the point of reference is even wider. So now we're going to talk about an area, a colony, a city, even a country. I work in Bandra or I work in Mumbai. You can say I live in India, for example. You can also say I live in an apartment. Why so? Because it can be any apartment. We're not really specifying the area here. So once this is done and you have understood, maybe pause the video, review it if you think that there were too many details, but there is still more to come your way. We are going to keep talking about the same prepositions, but let's go to a generalization. Now we're going to use at, in or on to talk about time. So earlier we were talking about places or locations, but the concept remains the same. At is used for a very specific time reference. So if you want to say at 10 a.m., we say at because it's a very specific time. On a particular day or date. So now it could be anywhere on that day or date. And finally, when we say in, then the point of reference is a lot larger or broader. It could be in a particular month, in a year, in a decade, even in a particular season. Let's take a look at some specific examples now. So let's say that you are telling someone that you will meet them. You can say, I will meet you at a specific time, for example, at 10 a.m., at noon, at midnight, any specific time will do. On a particular day or date. I will meet you at 10 a.m. on Saturday or on this weekend. Now over here, you would notice that I have mentioned that the British say at the weekend. So both are correct. On the weekend is more American, at the weekend is more British. I personally feel more comfortable with saying on the weekend, but either way, you will not be wrong. Then we say on Republic Day, again, which is a specific day, or on the 1st of June. So, as you can see, so far the logic is fairly simple. Now let's talk about in. In can refer to a part of the day. So, for example, I get most of my work done in the morning. It can be any part of the morning. We can also say that I usually take a vacation in June. Again, the point of reference is slightly more broad. You could talk about a particular year, 2023. You could talk about the seasons. In the winter, you could talk about a particular decade. For example, in the 90s, the songs use jhankar beats, for example. You could also talk about the past or the future. So, for example, in the future or in the past. So, you get the idea on the whole. At is specific, on is less specific, and in is even less specific. So, at and in are used to refer to positions. But to is generally used for movement or direction. So the reason people get confused is that all of these prepositions refer to places, but they refer to places in a slightly different way. The reason people get confused is that all three prepositions, at, in and to, refer to places. But they refer to places in different ways. So let's take a look at a few examples. He works at the pharmacy, which is of course a specific location. But we would say that he goes to the pharmacy by bus. Why are we saying to the pharmacy even though it's the same location? Because now we're talking about movement. So again, the idea is fairly simple. At or in involves some sort of a static position, but when you say to, then you are moving in one direction or the other. Now let's look at and to again, but there is a difference in usage. When we use at after certain verbs, it usually refers to the target of communication. For example, when we say something like smile at, you smile at a particular person. So currently I am smiling at the camera, hoping that you will appreciate that smile. Now I'm also looking at the camera, waving at the camera, frowning at the camera. So again, the target is the camera for me. So whenever we use at after a verb, we are referring to some sort of non-verbal communication and to whom it is directed. Now let's take a look at how we use to. Just hang on. Now a lot of times we use at after verbs which indicate some sort of aggression. For example, we would say, don't throw stones at the dog. Why are we saying that? Because you're being mean to the dog. So don't throw something at a particular animal. But what if we wanted to change the meaning of this sentence slightly? Then we would say something like, don't throw food to the dog. Now you're not attacking the dog. You are just presenting the dog with food. So at and to after verbs can change the meaning of the sentence. So when we say throw at, it is an aggressive action, but when we say throw to, it is a non-aggressive action. Now let's compare this second set of sentences. When we say people pointed at me and laughed, they're obviously mocking me, which is a hostile, aggressive sort of an action. But when we say the teacher pointed to the question on the board, then we're not mocking the question or the board, we're just highlighting it. So changing the preposition between at and to will change the meaning of your sentence. So please be careful with this one. We have one more example. So the teacher shouted at the student. Obviously, this is an undesirable action for the student. It is sort of an attack or aggression. But when we say shout to me, if you need help, it means call me. There's no aggression involved there. So again, shout at and shout to are both correct, but they have different meanings. Point at and point to are both correct, but different meanings. I'm sure you appreciate what I'm trying to convey here. Let's move on and take a look at a few more concepts related to these prepositions. This one is going to be fairly interesting. We often use in or on to refer to travel or transport. Now, this is something that I discovered only recently. I never knew this, so I'm very excited about presenting these facts to you. The usage of in versus on actually depends on two things. One thing is the size of the vehicle or the mode of transport, whether it's small or whether it is big. The second thing is whether that mode of transport has walls. I could not believe that this is actually true, but it is. Let's take a look at some examples. We use on for large vehicles. For example, we would say, I'm on a bus, I'm on a train, I'm on a large plane. Even if you don't say large, it is implied that it's fairly big. Do we say that I am in a bus? To a lot of us, it sounds correct, but it's actually not right to say that. So we are always on a bus, on a train, on a plane. Don't say in a bus or in a train. You can use in some very rare cases where you want to emphasize that you're not outside the train, you're inside it, but those cases usually don't arise. So let's just discard the option of using in. But let's continue with the original idea, the size of the vessel. So large vessels, we say on. We also use on for modes of transport which have no walls. For example, I'm on a horse, I'm on a motorcycle, I'm on a bicycle. No walls, as you can see. But what if the mode of transport is relatively smaller? For example, a car or a taxi. So then we would say, I am in a car, I am in a taxi. I'm in a small plane. Even if you don't say small, it's kind of implied that it's a small plane or maybe a private plane supposed to carry only a few passengers maybe. You also say, I'm in a helicopter. Why? Because again, it's supposed to be a small mode of transport as compared to, let's say, a commercial airplane. Now let's continue. There are some other verbal idioms or expressions that are very confusing. So I thought we might as well cover a few of them here. Do you say that we arrived for the meeting on time? Well, yes, we do, of course. But what does on time actually mean? On time means that you're neither late nor early. You're punctual, right on time. So if the meeting is scheduled for 12, you probably arrived at the time that you had planned to arrive. But what if you say that you arrived for something in time? How does it change things? Let's take a look at this example. We arrived in time to have a cup of tea before the meeting. So in time usually implies that you arrived before something was supposed to happen. So you had time to spare. In this case, you had enough time to have some tea before the meeting began. So in time is with time to spare. Let's take a look at the third one. I managed to submit my presentation just in time. We all know what just in time means. It means in the nick of time, at the last moment. But actually what we're trying to say is that it might have been late. So just in time means at the last moment. Again, all three are correct, but we need to understand what they convey when we use particular prepositions. We are not going to end before a quiz. This is just to ensure that you retain whatever you have watched in this video. So let's get started. I would suggest that you pause for a few seconds, solve the questions, and then take a look at the answers. There are only 3 questions. It shouldn't take you too long. Let's get started with the answers. So, I'll meet you at the club. Now we're talking about a particular day, but we're also talking about a specific time. So if you remember the rules for time, we would probably say, I will meet you at the club on Saturday afternoon at 2:30. We're talking about a particular day or a part of the day, and at 2:30 becomes a very specific time. Now, in some cases, people like to omit the preposition entirely. For example, when we say, I'll see you Sunday, which is all right, and usually we use that kind of language when we are speaking to someone informally. So it's not incorrect to omit the preposition in some cases. Here, if we say, I'll meet you at the club Saturday afternoon at 2:30, it's fine to omit the on. The second question here, the guide pointed to or at an area on the map. If you remember, when you point at someone, you're probably trying to make fun of them or attack them for something. But here, the guide is just trying to highlight a particular area, so we should use pointed to. For the third question, you need to use some degree of logic. So refer to the given facts to fill in the blanks. What are the given facts? The meeting started at 1. Sarah arrived at 12:50, which is 10 minutes before the meeting, and John arrived at 1 o'clock. So, did Sarah arrive on time, in time, or at time? Sarah arrived before the meeting started. She had time to spare. So, we should say that she was in time. Now, John arrived exactly on time, 1 o'clock. So, we would say John arrived on time. And that's pretty much it for today, folks. I know that we covered a very small area of grammar. There is a lot more grammar that's going to come your way. So, stay put.